morning, everybody. Welcome to Silicon Valley. Welcome to Silicon Valley Crowdfund Ventures. Silicon Valley meets crowdfunding. There's a lot of Silicon Valley, but this is a very special place. We're honored to have you here, our great speakers, audience, our great sponsor that put this event together. I'm very proud of this event. It's our second year, and glad you have to join us to celebrate the second years of anniversary of a JOB Act, which is going to happen sooner or later. And it will. And we'll have a next year, hopefully we're celebrating, or in a few months. But I wanted to thank you, and also I wanted to mention, when we started this Silicon Valley Crowdfund Ventures and Silicon Valley conference, our intention was that to bring the expert, we bring the knowledgeable people from all over the world to Silicon Valley and celebrate with each other actually about and share their knowledge for art and meet and do networking, but kind of I see it as a celebration. I see it as having fun, meeting our peers and to exchange ideas. And so we started that, and we started the CrowdFund Beat, which is an online magazine that we have in couple of the countries that we have, about 7 countries and 5 languages. And we're grateful. I'm very happy because I learned a lot from it. So I just wanted to thank you being here. And I'm going to bring our maestro. We have MC, great guy here, and Richard Bless. Richard, so thank you, and let's celebrate. Let's enjoy. Have fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Sydney. Welcome, everybody. I'm Richard Bliss, the Master of Ceremonies that will be kind of running the show today. Thrilled to be here. Thrilled to have you here as we start this event, our second annual crowdfunding conference. A lot has changed since the one we held last year, some for good, some change has been no change, so that's been some of the change that we've experienced. What we're going to do today is we're going to start off with our first keynote speaker. He's well known to all of us. He's accomplished quite a few things in the industry. I could talk extensively about his accomplishments. Jason Best is the co-founder of Crowdfund Capital Advisors, and I think one of his outstanding things is he's also the author of one of the Crowdfunding for Dummies. I think that's a great accomplishment because it's easy to introduce crowdfunding to a lot of people when I just hold that up and say, you don't have to know a whole lot because Jason's told you everything you need to know. So he's going to instruct us. A room, hopefully I'm not implying that we're a room full of dummies, so we're doing okay. Jason, let's welcome Jason Best as our first keynote speaker.
Thanks very much for having me here today. Pleasure to be here and see some old friends from the industry as well as some new faces. Certainly, it's 2 years since the signing of the bill, and there actually has been a lot that's happened, a lot of good things. What I wanted to spend some time talking about is, so today we spend about half of our time here in the US working with clients. We also spend about half of our time outside of the United States. And so really working with other governments and institutions and other organizations and investors are trying to figure out how does this play in our market, how does this work for us. And so what I want to do is just share a little bit of the news from what we're seeing elsewhere that I think is both interesting and I think presents opportunities for investors and organizations that are looking to expand. So first of all, really we're talking about 3 macro trends that really this crowdfunding space depends on. First, it's this, it sounds kind of basic, but it really gets really interesting when you think about it a little bit more. Thinking about how this movement from offline and institutional relationships to online and individual relationships. That's really this kind of macro trend we've seen with the web generally. And what we're now seeing is that that's moving into the finance space as well. There's been many other industries that this zip code has disrupted in the last 20 years, and finances will be the most recent one of them. Finance will be, and that's really the last one that hasn't been disrupted fully. And so we think that this is just part of this larger trend. So it's not really, crowdfunding is not something that people may have thought about a couple years ago as being this phenomenon off in a corner. This is part of a broad trend. Number 2, people talk about democratization of capital. I really see that as just a small part of democratization of information. And that's really what we've seen over the last 15 years, and again, what's finally come to financial services. We started to see that with stock trading moving online, and now we've seen that with crowdfunding. And then third, really thinking about this in developing economies. So last November, we issued a report for the World Bank talking about, great, crowdfunding is this phenomenon we've seen in Europe and in the US. What about for developing economies? How does this work to help us reach our goals? And we really found a lot of potential. The research we did found over $90 billion worth of market opportunity over the next 20 years just in developing economies. And that's because the needs they have in those economies is so pronounced with regard to job creation and the ability not to create innovation or not to create entrepreneurs, because many countries have that, but how do you surface those for investors and for opportunities to really grow? And so we see a huge opportunity there. One of the concerns, actually, from a U.S. perspective is that there's an opportunity for those countries and many other countries other than the United States, as we continue to lag in the promulgation of the regulation, for those other countries to leapfrog. And to, sort of like the metaphor that is commonly used is, how cell phones came to China and leapfrogged over landlines. And so the same kind of a phenomenon can occur here, and we're beginning to see those things happen outside of the United States. From an investor's point of view, I think that we've seen a lot of people focusing on platforms. There are a lot of platforms here today. Those things are critical for the success of the industry. I think the thing, in addition to that investors need to consider, and also the platforms need to consider, is there's a whole lot of other infrastructure that needs to be developed both here in the United States as well as globally to allow these markets to mature. Because we have to have things like trust and transparency tools. We have to have things that are going to allow more deal velocity, that are going to reduce friction, that are going to increase information and communication among the ecosystem and among the investor and the company. So there are a lot of segments in this industry that are really going to be interesting to really allow this. Because what we've seen today is, we've seen sort of, capital flowing on rewards-based platforms, but you have to have this additional infrastructure to really get scale. And so those infrastructure needs are going to present some interesting investment opportunities, and those will both be in the US as well as globally. Because crowdfunding also, because one of the big things that people are thinking about outside of the US is diaspora dollars. How do I get investment from people from our country of origin back to our country? Just if you look at the remittances just to Mexico, it's like $24 billion a year. It's 2.5% of their GDP. It's a big number. Now, a lot of that is used for consumption and will always be used for consumption and will not be used for investment. But what they're thinking about is how do we layer something on top of that? And what could be the power of those remittances will continue, but then how do you layer another thing on top of that? How does crowdfunding allow that to happen in a more efficient and effective way? So just thinking about what's next, from a venture investing perspective, as those of you who are in the space know, venture investing outside of the U.S. is really nascent. One could also argue that in many parts of the U.S., venture is very nascent outside of a handful of zip codes. And so I think that there's this really interesting opportunity to think about what are the technologies and what are the strategies that are going to bridge that gap. How are you as an investor, or how are investors in other countries going to reach out? One of the things that we're doing with some institutions is helping them to think about how they're going to create products and services to serve this new industry. Or how are they going to create new ways of investing at scale? And by that I mean, here we are in Palo Alto where there's rich and deep deal flow, but as funds get larger and people are looking for new opportunities in new places, how do you create new models for making those investments at distance and at scale? Because the 60-mile rule of I'm not going to drive any more than an hour away from here to make an investment, or people can come to me, that will continue for a while, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity that's going to be exposed through crowdfunding, and the ability to create relationships and to leverage technology to make those investments effectively is going to be really important. So I just wanted to give just kind of a few highlights, a few initial thoughts. I know we're trying to keep on track this morning, and so what I wanted to do is throw it open to any questions from anybody here.
You've been doing a lot internationally. We'd love to hear your views on what you see happening internationally from a global perspective. I'm from Canada, so we're looking at crowdfunding as well. We'd like to see your kind of global view of either a North American play or even beyond Europe, et cetera. Is is there an aggregation that's going to happen once we kind of all figure it out at a country level?
So the question was just thinking about it from a regional or global level, what are we seeing? Everybody is pretty much focused in their own countries right now. There are some platforms that are beginning to think about global strategies and thinking about multiple groups. We're seeing, obviously on the rewards-based side, you've got a couple of regional plays in Latin America that are there. We're also helping to form the Latin American Crowdfunding Association. There's just been a Mexican Crowdfunding Association that's just been formed. Obviously, we've got well-formed organizations in the EU and in the UK. But certainly, we're seeing a lot of activity in the Middle East as well. And that's certainly been an area where we've seen a lot of activity and interest in crowdfunding for a number of reasons, both for the ability to deliver capital to countries where there are sort of like there kind of this situation in the Middle East where some countries where you have a lot of entrepreneurship and not much capital, and other countries like the Gulf where you have a lot of capital and entrepreneurship is not as well developed. And so this ability to bridge that gap with technology is certainly something that folks in the region are looking at. But I think there's a lot of interesting things going on. I think also we're beginning to see Asia. Asia was sort of lagging for a while in kind of coming to this market, but we've certainly seen recently in Malaysia and Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, that there's been a lot of activity kind of beginning to get moving there. So I think globally we're seeing a lot of activity. We see that other countries will move forward. I think you'll see a lot of movement in the next 18 months in a number of those countries, and so hopefully Title III will be approved this year and we'll move forward.
Jason, you wrote a paper for the World Bank about the crowdfunding globally and the impact it's going to have. Can you address that a little bit? What impact you anticipate this having internationally around the world with crowdfunding, impact it will have on?
Well, I think we believe that it has the opportunity to help solve some of the challenges that currently exist in developing economies. So there's been a lot of work that's been done to create innovation centers and accelerators and incubators and entrepreneurship training in a number of countries. Like billions of dollars has been spent globally on that. Typically what happens at the end of those processes is they tell the entrepreneurs, congratulations, you're now accelerated and you're incubated and you have a company and that's great. Now, what we need you to do is go find some investors. And go talk to some angels, go talk to some rich people, go talk to the bank, whatever. And so what you're doing there is you're forcing people to say, okay, they're going to, many times when people may be called angel investors in those countries, but really it's not, they are traditional investors and wealthy individuals who are normally accustomed to making traditional investments, minerals, real estate, agriculture. And so they're very predictable and safe returns, and they're not accustomed to thinking about these investments from a standpoint of a high risk or high potential return from venture investing. And so the difficulty becomes in helping them bridge that gap, because you're also dealing with the issue that these people are focused more on wealth preservation maybe than sometimes in wealth accumulation. And so a different lens with which they're looking at this investment opportunity. So what we believe and we talk about here is this opportunity to expand that universe so that it's not only just accredited investors, but you've got this new stripe, this new kind of category of investor, people who in developing economies who have portfolios, who make investments in public companies, who understand risk and reward, but do not have access to the deal flow at that kind of angel investor level. So it's a chance to broaden the number of people who can make investments in private companies and leverage technology to do that. So we see that happening here in the U.S. already in the fact that you have people, because the numbers, I've seen several different numbers, so it depends on which one you believe, between 5 and 15% of people who qualify in the U.S. as accredited investors actually make investments in private companies. And so there's a large untapped market of people who qualify as accredited investors today that can be utilized on those accredited platforms. We think certainly that there are a lot of opportunities similar to that outside of the U.S. So that's kind of what we're thinking there. Look, thanks everybody for your time today, and I hope you have a great conference.
Thanks, Jason. Before we introduce our next speaker, keynote speaker, I just wanted to share a little bit. I've been covering the crowdfunding space for the past 3 years, but mine has been mainly focused around the rewards-based. Kickstarter and a lot of things that Kickstarter has done that's entered into the public conscience when they think of crowdfunding. That's a lot of the opportunity that they see. We're going to, I think, touch on that a little bit with some of the panels, and our next keynote speaker is going to touch on a little bit of the success that Kickstarter has had. There are some positives that we hear about the crowdfunding space on the rewards-based, where somebody can raise a significant amount of capital, not give up any of their equity, and be able to develop a product or develop a service or some type of capability. And there's a lot of interest around that. Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Rocket Hub, CrowdTilt, they just continue to see the development of these capabilities. What's interesting is that this past year, I inadvertently ran an experiment. I launched a crowdfunding campaign for the Boston bombing marathon, but not directly for those victims. What happened was that as I was watching television and watching the news coverage, and we watched the suspect number 2 be identified and captured in the boat of Mr. Henneby's backyard. I'm pretty sure everybody remembers that, the thermal imaging. And they shot up his boat when they captured the suspect. And I was sitting there watching, and my wife turned to me and she said, "That poor guy just lost his boat. Somebody should raise some money to help him replace his boat." Okay. I mean, that wouldn't fall under your normal traditional cause-based crowdfunding, which millions and millions of dollars was raised for the victims there through the One Fund, Boston One Fund. I thought, okay, let's give this a try. Well, my family was going to dinner. My wife took my daughter and got in the car and said, "Hey, we're going to dinner." I said, "Hang on just a second." I walked out to my studio, recorded a quick video on my camera and my computer, loaded it up to Indiegogo, and created this short little campaign saying, "I'm trying to raise money for Mr. Henneberry's boat. Please donate money for his boat." And then as I walked out, my wife's honking the horn in the car, and let's go. I just tweeted it to Diane Sawyer and David Muir over at ABC News, because that's where I had just seen the story. Didn't think anything about it. Went and got in the car, went to dinner. Came home that night, got 2 emails. Actually got a phone call that I had missed, one from the Diane Sawyer camp and one from the David Muir camp, saying, "We'd like to run your video on Good Morning America Sunday morning. Are you fine with that?" Yeah, let me think about that one. That's a trick question. Sure. So they took my video, this little video I had created, just threw this video together, and Sunday morning, my wife's kind of excited. I mean, this is kind of cool. Up comes Good Morning America Sunday morning. Richard Bliss, California podcaster and crowdfunding expert, has launched this campaign, and they put my video up there. Now, my wife at this point was just thinking that I would get mentioned, but there's the video. We're doing this boat. It got picked up by Good Morning America. It got picked up by Fox News out of Boston, called me. We did a Skype call. The local NBC station here came by my house with a camera crew. I mean, we got some significant coverage for this idea. I raised $784 to help him replace his boat. Okay? That was kind of discouraging. At the same time, a gentleman out of Austin, Texas, had the same idea. He put his on another crowdfunding platform, CrowdTilt, which is a San Francisco-based platform. CrowdTilt actually helps get the message out. No international coverage, no media, no newspapers, nothing, but almost all social media coverage of their exact same campaign, helping Dave Henneberry get money to replace his boat. They raised, in a shorter amount of time than I did, $55,000 for Mr. Henneberry to get his boat. Now, I considered that a success because what it did, though, is it inadvertently taught me something. And that is the gulf between, I got massive coverage. I got phone calls from relatives I didn't even know I had, okay? But the gulf between taking the idea of backing that and the clicking to donate, right? That gulf was too wide for the audience that I was reaching to actually affect change. On the other hand, where the engagement was at the point of click here and give became very easy, very similar to what the Red Cross does with your ability to donate $10 with a text message. I share that with you that crowdfunding is creeping in to our everyday lives in very different ways. And so even though sometimes we feel a little frustrated with the slow pace of our governments moving, we are making progress as far as the general awareness and acceptance of how to give money in a way that's beyond traditional causes or beyond equity, but that is this hybrid that people are starting to discover. So that's a little short story that I wanted to cover with you. Hopefully what it did is gave Doug a little bit more time to think about what he's going to tell us this morning. Doug is our keynote speaker, our second keynote speaker. He's on the program for later on this afternoon. We had to switch. Richard is still caught in transit flying in. And so I wanted to introduce Doug. Doug. I'm just going to stick with Doug because I've had a mind blank now. So Doug and I met last year. He and I have been in communication over this past year. He has been everywhere. The man spends his whole life on a plane talking, championing, campaigning, evangelizing, crowdfunding, and we are thrilled and privileged to have him opportunity to come and speak to us again this morning and be here with us today. So I'd like to welcome Doug. Doug, how do you pronounce your last name? Best. It's embarrassing to me suddenly to blank that out. Thank you. Elenoff. So.
Obviously, I haven't done a good enough job getting
No. And I just want to point out that in all the times that we've seen Doug,
Oh, I knew this was coming.
yes, I've never seen him without a tie. And so that's what threw me off. I looked back there and I'm like, who is that person? I didn't even recognize you. Clark Kent, Superman.
I was trying to not play a lawyer today.
Yes, you're doing a good job. Thanks, man.
Well, thank you, Richard Bliss. That is your name, right? And Sydney in particular for hosting yet again generously, greatly appreciated. But those extra couple of minutes did help. I did collect my thoughts, and I'll share some things with you all. It was a year ago that I stood here and I was concerned about some remarks that a previous speaker had made about being very cavalier about how to approach crowdfunding, and that we should all just go do what we think is best, notwithstanding the fact that the proposed rules in Title III had not come out yet. I took issue with that. Whether or not I'm wearing a tie or not wearing a tie, I thought that was inadvisable. Luckily this year I'm flanked by some other talented lawyers in the room, both domestic and international. Brian Kozak, who joins us from Canada. Brian Korn is here as well, who's also with a large law firm in the US. And we take our role in the sale of securities very seriously. It's not to be taken lightly. People are raising money for good entrepreneurial activities, and investors who've earned their money and worked really hard for it need to be taken seriously and protected. And so I bring this up for a couple reasons. One is I think the point Richard was making indirectly about the woefully inadequate job he did raising money for the boat owner was that there are great opportunities that need to raise money but haven't figured out the efficient, more intelligent way of doing it in an online environment. And that story summarizes. If you do it correctly, you raise $55,000. If you don't, you get some recognition and a pat on the back and nobody remembers your name. Oh, that's me. So what we're talking about is doing things better, more efficiently than they've ever been done before, and that's the theme. But in that context, I will tell you, since a year ago, we represent a lot of crowdfunding folks, both domestically and internationally. There are regulators who are also paying attention to this world, and several of our clients over the last year have gotten phone calls, inquiries. And it's largely because the regulators, whether it's a state regulator or a federal regulator, don't know the rules the way a lot of us in this room do. And in short order, we make the issues go away, but what I need to impress upon you is that it's a sale of securities. There's a lot at risk. Do it appropriately, find good representation, and take it seriously. As fun as it has been for many of us in this room to build this new industry together, and I see Howard probably has got more publicity than I have, we have to collectively do it in a way that we can look back once it's all successful, and some people have lost money, that we've done it in a responsible way. So that's my first year in review, that some of the things I was concerned about, in fact, have come true with regulators. And that's the Doug Downer part of the conversation, and now I'll go back upbeat because I like that better, and I'll put my tie back The other things that's happened in the last year is since last year on September 23rd, Title II of the Jobs Act went into effect, and since that time, and the SEC follows this information pretty carefully, it's $8 to $10 billion worth of financings have taken place through general solicitation. That's not all that interesting to me. I think that's great, and hopefully some people that you know or yourselves have raised money that way. I care about the online sale of securities during that period of time, and the best number I have comes to us through Luan Cox's site, Crowdnetics, because she gets a lot of API feeds off some of the Title II platforms that are doing business. About $160 million has been raised, which, while in the scheme of the capital markets is relatively insignificant, it's a big number for, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. I will put that down. And half of it's been for VC-like activities, and the other half, interestingly, and I think it's a theme that everybody should be aware of, and you'll have an opportunity to listen to a panel today, has been real estate related. Real estate, because it's inherently local in nature and people can see, touch, and feel it, feel more comfortable sometimes investing in that asset class. And it's gotten a lot of attention in the Title II world. On October 23rd, the Title III proposed rules of the SEC came out. They were, the public was allowed to comment and is still commenting actually, and those comments were supposed to be in February 3rd. My observation that I'll share with you is the SEC painstakingly went about their business and took on board comments, conversations that many of us had directly with them. And even though there were provisions in there that I don't like, I think are going to be problematic, I have to tell you that I think it was an incredibly earnest effort that they undertook. And yes, 585 pages is a little discouraging, but at the same time, there are only 3 things, and I'll highlight them quickly for you that I think are really problematic, one of which I think goes away, the other one of which I think can't go away, at least without congressional action, and then the last piece is a problem. Of those 3 things, the audit requirement, which seems to be an ongoing refrain, is nothing that SEC can do. It's in the statute. There are people who are working on Jobs Act 2.0, and if Congress wants, they'll try and make that go away. But it's nothing that the SEC is going to make go away. It's going to stay. The thing that they opportunistically took advantage of is they imposed that the audit requirement is going to be required for the ongoing life of that same entrepreneurial activity, which I don't think that they had to do. I think it does end up costing the entrepreneur too much money. The next is the liability of the funding platform. My personal view is that the funding platform is a posting site. It should not have securities law liability for the actions of the entrepreneur on the site. The SEC took a contrary point of view and pinned the tail right on the donkey and made very clear that the funding platform will be liable for the actions of the entrepreneur, page 280. There's a sentence that they threw in, and we are working aggressively to try to convince them to take a different approach, which I don't think they will. And the last one is curation, which we talked about last year, is that the funding platforms technically do not have the right to pick and choose which deals in a Title III environment go up on their site. That's deemed currently to be investment advice. I believe that that will change, and the SEC will allow portals to pick and choose which deals go on their site because it helps investors. I don't have that much more time, so I'll kind of rifle through some issues with you. I think what Jason and I have 10 minutes? Okay, fine. So those are the 3 issues. Those are fundamental issues that need to be addressed. But everything else, you have to socialize in a Title III environment in full view of everybody who registers on that site, so everybody gets to know what's being thought and talked about on the individual deals. And I think the SEC spent a lot of time struggling with how social media would interact with the sale of securities in an online situation, and I think they did a really good job. So while I want people to be encouraged by the proposed rules. There's a lot of people in this room have submitted comment letters about the proposed rules, but my personal view is, at the end of the day, it creates a viable industry. What I always take issue with is people saying, well, the SEC shouldn't require the disclosure that's required in Title III. This is raising money from people you may or may not know, and you have a real responsibility to make sure they understand the risks associated with the investment they're making, and it shouldn't be taken casually or lightly. What we're doing in the U.S. is being watched worldwide. Brian, as I said, Kozak is here from Canada. The Ontario Securities Commission just came out with their proposed rules, which interestingly doesn't have those 3 flawed provisions in their proposals. And Brian's worked closely with the OSC, and now Canada will start pursuing crowdfunding. It's live in England. There's a law now in Italy, France. Jason and Woody are going worldwide with the State Department and the World Bank. And so there's huge momentum building there. The broader statement is that people are not content with the status quo. One of the things you'll hear about today is intrastate crowdfunding, notwithstanding the fact that the Title III rules are not moving as expeditiously as Richard pointed out that people would like. States are not standing idly by and doing nothing. I think nearly 20 states have proposed intrastate crowdfunding rules, meaning it can only be conducted in those individual states with entrepreneurs in those states, investors in those states. NASA, which is the umbrella organization for state securities regulators, and the SEC are concerned about intrastate crowdfunding. And there hasn't been all that much activity actually done in those states, which is a handful, that allows intrastate crowdfunding. But the statement, and that's what's being missed, is that people want change. They want to enable entrepreneurs to raise money more efficiently than they have before, and they're not going to tolerate inaction or just allowing things to be the way they have been always. And the best example I can give you of that is that on Sunday I woke up to read an editorial in the New York Times about the Oculus deal. Does everybody know Oculus? Okay. I was so outraged that I actually wrote something for the first time in a long time, and I sent it around to a lot of the industry folks who were going to submit it as an op-ed. The New York Times took the position that Oculus stands for the proposition that we can't have crowdfunding in this country because people will lose money. It's the opposite conclusion. Had individuals been able to invest in, because Title III was live in Oculus, had that opportunity been available to people, because Oculus may not have done it, they would have walked away having made money. It's a good example of why the crowd sometimes gets things right and want to participate. Instead, they get Zippo. And the SEC, I think their analysis was flawed, as well as I don't think it was well researched. And so there will be a response to that. But it shows the amount of time and attention that is being spent on crowdfunding here. Last few things. What's happened in the last year, Title II, which I didn't think would happen even in the next few years. AngelList has, 5,000 deals that are generally soliciting currently. They have probably closed at this point at least 40-ish deals, probably raised nearly $20 million, and I'm off a little bit because I haven't heard those guys speak recently. But that's validating, and their model is based upon, and the only deals that have closed on that site, if you pay it, has everybody gone on the AngelList site? So you know the syndicate, the lead syndicate manager concept, where an investor from the Valley has to validate the deal and put money into the deal, structure the deal. Those are the only ones that have raised money. Out of all those deals that are generally soliciting on that site, if nobody stands in the front of the room and says, I'm in, the crowd doesn't really follow. That is so misunderstood by regulators. They think virality is just going to sweep the country and unaccredited investors are going to move all their money into these deals. That's not going to happen. I think more realistically what's going to happen is, like on Kickstarter, most of those campaigns are supported by friends and family. Maybe you get a few more friends and a few more family members who've got friends of friends who put money into deals, and you get your deals financed. But it's not going to be, except in the rare case, an Oculus or a Pebble Watch. Other validating points are on the Our Crowd site, which is the Israeli funding platform. They have a relationship with GE, And most of their deals, which are accredited crowdfunding deals, have venture folks in those deals as well. So notwithstanding all of the things that we were told a year and a half, 2 years ago, that VCs would not co-invest with accredited investors, and then you extrapolate to Title III that they won't also invest with unaccredited investors, I don't believe any of it. We're seeing different models emerge where they all play together. So you have venture firms that are heat mapping Kickstarter to see which deals are interesting, and then they go approach the entrepreneur and say, I'd like to put money into the deal, like Pebble Watch. And now clearly Oculus is an example of something along those lines. Last one is Circle Up. It has a relationship with Procter & Gamble. So large companies now recognize that the best way to engage with their audience is through crowdfunding. So I think that's very encouraging. So I think that gives you a very good sense as to what's happened in the last year. There's a lot of momentum, but at the same time, there's not been a huge amount of activity. So I think for those of you who are looking how to get into the industry, there's plenty of opportunity. Questions? Sure.
How do you foresee, I'm Scott Whaley from National Real Estate Investors. How do you foresee it as far as if you go to Canada and you start your crowdfund there, do you see, you're talking about interstate, but how about international? Do you go there because it's a great harbor and then do your business out of that locale?
The first thing I would point out, and I appreciate the question, and I'll let Brian fill in a second, is just because we allow general solicitation in the United States of America, Title II crowdfunding, where I can stand in front of a room and tell everybody that if you're interested in investing, you can invest so long as you're not a bad actor, or I take reasonable steps to verify that somebody's actually accredited with an accountant's letter. That doesn't mean I can take in Canadian money or UK money, because they have not liberalized their rules to permit or accommodate that. And Brian will speak to that later on his panel. So you have to be very careful when you're doing cross-border crowdfunding, because the rules are not harmonized. So you should come up to Brian Kozak, raise your hand, and he will answer that question for you privately later. Thanks.
Another question. Do you think that intrastate crowdfunding would have hurt the SEC's cause, or what do you see that all the states are taking the matters in their hands? Now we have California proposed and other states, Georgia, they're starting. So do you think it's going to hurt the national SEC? What is your
It's dicey, Sydney. I mean, that's I look at the broader mission and broader statement being made is that people want some change. I will tell you, I was on a panel with a woman from Trading and Markets, the SEC, last week in New York, and this was her personal remarks. She doesn't think that the states have the right to do what they're doing. Now, I don't think the SEC is going to enforce against these states necessarily, but so the first question is, can you have a crowdfunding portal and also do an intrastate offering? Or by virtue of the fact that you have a technology solution that goes across state boundaries, you have violated the concept of an intrastate offering. Georgia permits such an animal and there's a funding platform there, Spark Market. There hasn't been a problem so far because they're being very careful to use the technology just for local entrepreneurs and investors. I think that there is a role for intrastate crowdfunding independent of Title III, although the SEC would love Title III to preempt all the state intrastate exemptions. And the reason for that is very simple. Cost. Intrastate crowdfunding doesn't require a funding platform, so you don't have to pay that fee. There's no specific disclosure requirements the way, in certain of the states, the way there is at the federal level. And for that reason, I actually have a little bit of a problem with intrastate crowdfunding because, again, you're taking money from people and you have to do it responsibly, and I think disclosure is at the heart of that. So I think that intrastate crowdfunding will survive Title III. It has a role, but it's got a limited utility. Thank you. I'm not taking one from Mark. The answer, I don't know. What's the question? Yeah.
I wanted you to enlighten the audience a little bit about the OTCQX role that you were playing and some of the other designated advisors are playing. I think it provides the exit strategy we all. It's the elephant in the room we haven't talked about yet.
Fair enough. And it's funny, it hasn't come up since you were kind enough to interview me on your program. So the question's really, what's the liquidity event in all of this? The vast majority, in my mind, for Title III are going to be debt financings, and you'll get your money back, or the thing will go out of business, and you won't get your money back. I don't mean to be so blunt, but that it is investing, folks, and people will lose a lot of money. In a Title II world where we're creating all this wonderful enthusiasm for entrepreneurship, those companies will either get venture funding in the Valley, they'll either go out of business, they'll merge, but there's going to be a certain number of them, as you and I have talked about, that are going to need liquidity for the investors to be able to sell over time, and they won't be debt deals, they'll be equity deals. And my personal view, and Devin and I were actually talking about it a little bit before, is that they need a place to trade. Howard's working on a solution, and the OTCQX, which is the high end of the pink sheets for those of you who are securities folks. We've rebranded because we can't talk about the pink sheets, is a place where I believe these securities, one way or another, will come to rest, and there'll be a public mark, and you'll be able to transfer them whether or not there's enough liquidity to actually create a tradable marketplace. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
And Doug, you have a panel this afternoon. Okay, at 6.
I'm going to be around all day.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Okay, we're going to go ahead and turn the time over to Sydney, and the next panel can start to come up, but Sydney wants to recognize some of our sponsors that have made this possible.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, our great speakers here, Doug Elenoff, and we have great other lineup for you from Joy, and Howard, and Admiral, and I can't say that. you got somebody, Mr. Elenoff, and so a great audience we have over there, and Kendall, and we're very. I'm very happy that we are. By the way, we're right now broadcasting in US Stream and CrowdFund Beat. So if you have anybody audience, we're in 7 countries, and we're streaming on the US Stream on the CrowdFund Beat and live crowdfunding.tv. So, and I'm very proud of this organization that we do, because we bring the expert here. We bring people that they come and they have knowledge and they share their knowledge. So this is what it's all about in our conference that are gathering here. But I want to recognize, without participant of our funding by our sponsor, we wouldn't be here. We're very grateful to that. I want to recognize a couple of them. We have, since last year, we have a lot of new companies are coming in, which is very wonderful. I see that being in the media, and I see new companies in real estate, new companies coming on the IRA, like companies like Pensco, and we have, stand up, please. I wanted my sponsors stand up over there. Companies like Avenue, and Asset Avenue, and Roy would please stand up. And I want to thank you. And this is great. This business that we are in, it's evolving to be an industry. And we're grateful for people like Howard, Doug, and other people. And when I came and I studied these things, and also Jason Best, I mean, they started the Jobs Act, and they did a lot of homework. David Drake, with all this great stuff, he's traveled all around the world, and he just put this conference. And our good friend Devin, and which is very easy, tirelessly does all this great education. So I am a learner. I learn all this, and I'm very happy to be here. And I appreciate you are here, but I want to thank your audience. I want to thank you, our sponsors. We have a great lineup today, and we have a good expert, from business of the crowdfunding, Kickstarters, reward crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding later on, real estate crowdfunding, which is very hot, and these days, and we have great lineup for you, and women's crowdfunding, because that's one thing happened, me and Howard share with that, is that woman entrepreneurship. I'm for that. I've always been that, because it's make the playing field. And we have Trish Costello, and she just got some funding over there with this woman portal. And it's a lot of great things are happening. So I wanted to share that with you. Thank you. Let's roll it. Thank you for Doug and Jason Best for this great being here with us. Thank you. Okay, we have the next panel, so please. You have the honor of being a moderator as you speak. Devin does a great job. He's tirelessly doing a lot of interview, and all of his interview is in livecrowdfunding.tv. If you go to the crowdfunding, and please do share with your friends. We have a hashtag SV Crowdfund, and we're live right now. Very, very good broadcast quality, not YouTube type over there. So we're in Ustream, and it's good, so share with your friends out there. And also the video of this production is going to be there, and along with the other interviews that Devin does. Gentlemen and ladies, please. And Devin, you're going to be also, yeah, exactly, yes. You're the man here.
You would like me to moderate the panel? Oh my gosh. All right. No pressure, no pressure. Well, this is fun. There is nothing like crowdfunding for changing the world, right? And that's my real passion. Howard, I know, shares that. This is an exciting place to be. Of course, Silicon Valley is the modern head of the universe, at the center of the universe, so it's fun to be here. Why don't we just take a minute and complete introductions? Sydney mentioned that I do interviews for CrowdFund Beat. So many of you I have interviewed. I've gotten to know many of you that way. It's exciting to be here and be among friends. I also write for Forbes. I've written a number of books, including Crowdfunding for Social Good, and it's exciting to have an opportunity to be a part of this panel. Kendall, why don't you start? Sure. Introduce yourself, and Howard and Joy, and then we'll have a little discussion.
Sure, and thank you, Devin. I'm Kendall Almarico, and I know most of you are looking at me going, who the hell is this guy, and why is he up there with Howard and Joy and Devin? So to answer your question, I am something of a Johnny-come-lately to the crowdfunding world, although I'm not Johnny-come-lately to the business funding world. I've been an attorney for 25 years who helped people start businesses for a number of years, and also saw what happened when the disaster hit in 2008. Saw crowdfunding, jumped into the world. I now write for Entrepreneur Magazine. I have a pretty large Twitter following. I've run a rewards-based crowdfunding platform. I've run a charity-based crowdfunding platform, and now we're getting ready to open fundhub.biz, which is going to do all the compliance, start to finish, everything that needs to be done to do Title III, Title II, Regulation A+, you name it. One of my partners in fundhub.biz is Kevin Carino, who is one of the Board of Governors members on FINRA. I have a very good connection to be able to do things the right way to make sure, as Doug pointed out, that the compliance is done correctly. This is people raising money. We need to protect the investor. We need to protect the entrepreneur. And we're going to automate 99% of what needs to be done. The other 1% is going to be done by competent people who actually are securities lawyers who know what they're doing. So that's why I'm up here, and now you can stop wondering. I'll turn it over to Howard, who probably deserves to be up here much more than I do.
Thank you for that, and thanks, Sydney, for putting this together. It's a historic time in the development of crowdfunding, and very proud to be here. For myself, the way that I got into this is as a lifelong entrepreneur trying to always raise capital to develop devices for treating heart and cardiovascular disease. And our very first invention back in the 80s, we got involved with the legislation for private offerings, where it said you had to have a substantial existing relationship with people over $1 million in assets and or 35 non-accredited investors. And right out of the gate, I found out how hard it was, and I didn't know anybody with over $1 million in assets. I grew up in a blue-collar family up in Minneapolis, and I found out that the old system was kind of slanted to the people that were already wealthy and rich. And then my second experience is in 2008, we took our company BioHeart public on NASDAQ at $5.23 a share, and it cost us $4.8 million to raise $7 million. And we were the only biotech IPO in the entire United States in 2008. And after those two experiences and years of frustration in the cost and complexity of raising capital, I decided to get involved with trying to affect financial reform, and became a really small cog of a big wheel of so many people, and people that worked much longer and harder on the legislative part of it, such as Jason and Best and Woody, but was able to get involved, and then that sequence to being asked to be state spokesperson for the state of California. Doug Rand of the White House Office of Science and Technology spoke with the team at Startup America Partnership, and they asked me to do that. That's 50-some speeches over the last 2 years. Along the way, I got lucky to get hired by CNBC to co-host a new TV show that's pending. The Title III regulation is called Crowdfund the American Dream. It's kind of like Shark Tank, but it's going to allow the viewers to invest while they watch the show. And we founded both Calex Crowdfund Connect and the California Stock Exchange. Calex Crowdfund Connect is not a portal. We're just trying to help people in a variety of ways who want to do crowdfunding, but without having a portal. So we refer people to other portals. And the California Stock Exchange is meant to be a social good impact stock exchange. Doug, thank you for mentioning it earlier. We actually are talking to OTCQX about hosting the California Stock Exchange, and our intention is to launch in November with 30 good social good impact stocks, no day trading, no short trading, and to allow people to have a chance to have the feeling of doing something good while they're getting a good return on investment. At least we hope a good return on investment.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sydney, so much for having this event today and bringing us all together. I love the events that you create and the people you bring together in the room, and I'm honored to be part of it. I'm Joy Schaffler of Leverage PR. I started my career in private equity, worked with a lot of growth stage companies that had some success, and when crowdfunding came about, I really saw it as an opportunity to activate your networks, to get people involved and really help early stage companies grow. So I sit on the board of CIFRA as well as CF50, which is a global think tank that will be producing some great academic research on the global crowdfunding ecosystem. We work with a lot of leaders within the crowdfunding peer-to-peer space and other financial and technology companies. We also are just launching next month a technology platform for crowdfunders called Crowd Builder, which automates the PR process for and social media process for them.
Great, Joy. Thank you very, very, very much. Joy, I wonder if you would just take a minute, and I'll just put this question to you. Give us an overview. You have a great perspective on crowdfunding. I wonder if you would just kind of take a few minutes and give us the lay of the land. How do you see things playing out right now? What's the situation, especially as it relates to the Jobs Act implementation, but broadly speaking in crowdfunding, what's the lay of the land right now?
Yeah, so right now what we're seeing, and we probably talk to, I'd say, anywhere from 5 to 10 new companies or existing companies that maybe are in stealth, or just different people out there per week sometimes at our firm Leverage PR, and just kind of I travel. I do a lot of traveling, way more than I'd like to some months across the country, and so meeting lots of people. And what we're seeing in the industry is we are seeing a lot of new industry vertical platforms emerging. So companies are maybe specializing in health and beauty, or specializing in crowdfunding for advertising, or sports and entertainment, and they're going out there and doing a lot of industry vertical platforms that are kind of rallying the support, right? So investors like to invest in industries that they know and understand, and so they're sometimes they have an existing affinity base that they pull from, or are just kind of launching to take advantage of a demand in the market. So we're seeing a lot of that, a lot of new peer-to-peer platforms emerging within the debt space. So also going after industry verticals, that's a really big trend that we're seeing. We're seeing a combination of the use of digital currencies in crowdfunding platforms. There's, I believe Realty Shares just did a partnership with Bitcoin, if I remember correctly, and we've been talking to a lot of digital currency providers as well that are looking to kind of blend in with the crowdfunding space, which could make for some very interesting issues there. but you think we have compliance problems now.
Yeah.
So, we're just seeing a lot of people go after industry vertical niche platforms, and then a lot of investment banks or kind of some of the smarter money that's looking on this, that's stepping in or looking to step in. So there's going to be a lot of announcements of funding that are going to be coming out here in the very near future. A lot of companies I know that are in the final stages of kind of penning the check with different VC firms out there. So we should see a lot of pretty good announcements coming. Just a lot of interesting stuff going on in the space behind the scenes.
That's really interesting. It is kind of a fun thing to think about Bitcoin and other digital currencies getting involved in crowdfunding, and it's in a way a natural thing because it tends to be early stage adopters who are involved in both communities right now, right? We're still in the early days of crowdfunding, and it's people like you who are early adopters who are engaging in crowdfunding, and of course they would naturally get involved with the digital currencies, which is still in their early days as well. Fun coincidence I hadn't thought about before. Joy, thank you for that insight. Howard,
One more thing I forgot to add. A lot of the emerging platforms that are coming out are Reg D platforms. So very, very few kind of Title III platforms, a lot of Reg Ds that are emerging.
Yeah. Howard, I wonder if you would talk a little bit about fundamentally how you see, you kind of hinted at this in your introduction, but tell us how you see crowdfunding actually serving some social good, some social value. How does it change the markets in some way that's better?
Thank you for that opportunity. I really believe in so many ways that crowdfunding is going to be transformational to society. First and foremost, it's going to give people opportunity that never had an opportunity before, and I'm really excited, understanding how many people are out there that have all the skills to contribute an innovation that can change our lives and makes our lives better, but can't get out of the gate. Ben Franklin had the statement that money is of a proliferative nature. To get the second is often easier than getting the first, but the trouble is in getting the first. And that is so true with so many people that have the capability and the energy and the desire and have everything, but are just missing the capital to be able to show what they can do. The other element that we spoke about earlier is I happened to mention to Devin that I saw the movie this week, Cesar Chavez. It's a great movie. I recommend that you see it. And for those who don't know the story of Cesar Chavez, he led a boycott of the purchase of grapes back in the 60s in protest to try to get basic services for farm workers. Bathrooms, they didn't have bathrooms for the farm workers, the people who picked grapes, and the wages were pennies or a couple dollars in a day. And his tool to be able to effect change was by allowing the consumers to realize the power they had to help this cause. So the way that they were able to get the union in place to be able to get higher wages and to get bathrooms is that they asked people to stop buying grapes from the largest grape producer, and they succeeded. And this is another way that crowdfunding is going to affect social good, is that people are going to realize that where they put their investment dollar is going to affect the way corporations behave. And if they see money going towards social good and to companies that are treating people well and treating their community well and that are doing good things, then corporations are going to transform to that. The other thing is just the fundamental of innovation. There's so many things that we could talk about, but understanding that innovation comes from experimentation, innovation comes from trying a lot of stuff and keeping what works. There's certainly going to be a lot of failures in this early age of crowdfunding or in all ages of crowdfunding, but innovations that never would have had a chance to get off the ground are now going to get off the ground and are going to have a chance to prove what they can do, and that's going to be good for everybody. We're heading towards a time of unprecedented creativity and innovation, and couldn't be more excited about it.
Well, thank you, Howard. I think it is exciting to think about a world in which our collective dollars are driving social change and innovation, and it's so thank you very much for introducing that topic for us. Kendall, I think it's one of the interesting aspects that you raised about your current direction is related to this Reg A Plus, as we're calling it, the Title IV of the Jobs Act, which last year at this conference, I don't think it came up. It's now becoming kind of a topic du jour, and it's suddenly becoming much more relevant. I wonder if you would explain to us what Title IV does or is intended to do, and kind of the state of play and what you think the implications of that are.
Thank you, Devin. For those of you who don't know what Title IV or Regulation A Plus is, there's an 80-year-old law. By the way, pay attention to this. If you think crowdfunding in general could change the way the American economy works, Regulation A is possibly A Plus is possibly the biggest change ever in the economy of securities law. It may not ever happen, but if it does, a complete and utter change. There's an 80-year-old law called Regulation A that had all these limitations on taking a company public that would require, basically you could only raise $5 million, and the cost to do it, as Howard pointed out, probably cost you $7 million to go raise $5 million. Over the course of, I think, all the years it was in play, only a handful of people ever used it. Part of the Jobs Act, Title IV, is what's called Regulation A Plus. Regulation A Plus allows you to raise $50 million through a mini IPO, and if the law doesn't change, if the SEC enforces it the way that their proposed rules that came out in December came out, there is no state-by-state regulation requirement. You have no blue sky laws to deal with. You have federal preemption, which means you register an IPO. It's a minimal registration requirement. There's still a lot of disclosure, but it's nothing like a traditional IPO. You go to the SEC, you file for this thing, you will be able to raise up to $50 million through what I call a mini IPO without any state blue law, no state regulators coming in like the Massachusetts State Regulatory Board in 1980 that so famously told people in the state of Massachusetts, you cannot buy this risky investment, this IPO that's coming out in 1980. It's just so risky, $22, we're not letting our people buy this. That was Apple Computer. They shut the people of Massachusetts out of the Apple IPO because it was too risky. That same securities regulatory body, the Massachusetts state, has written the most scathing public comment to the SEC about Regulation A Plus because they know they're taking out of their hands this public offering that could absolutely change America. Absolutely change it. $50 million for what may end up not costing much more than under Title III raising $1 million under the crowdfunding rules. So think about that. Absolute game changer. Now, will the SEC succumb to the pressure of all the state regulators who are trying to squelch this and say, no, we need to regulate this, we need to be a part of this? That's what we don't know yet. The public comment period actually ended about a week ago. So we're in limbo, like with everything else. But it's a game changer if it happens.
Well, great. I think we have set the stage for some good discussion. As long as we've got this group of experts here, let's take advantage and let's give you an opportunity to ask questions. Who's got a question for this great panel?
I have a question.
Okay.
I want to ask a question of Devin because Devin was going to be on this panel until Sydney threw him up here, and I think it'd be. That's right. No, and I appreciate it. But Devin, I think, if I could just turn the tables on you as someone who, on a much broader scale than I do, writes to the general public and tries to educate them about what's going on in the crowdfunding world. How do you see this appalling, not just the New York Times editorial, but I don't know how many people out there saw the Bloomberg editorial that came out, which was the single most ridiculous, if whoever wrote that is in this room, I may slap you, but it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever read. They actually said that the Oculus raise was part of the Jobs Act, part of the Title III, that it was an equity crowdfunding deal. As someone who writes and educates the general public and tries to teach them, how do you see the role of the media misunderstanding what's going on, and what can we do about it?
Well, I think that's a great question because clearly there are a lot of people still who don't get it, and a lot of people are afraid of it. I am appalled by the fear, right? That's, I think, the scariest thing that we're seeing right now in the marketplace is this fear of crowdfunding. And any of you, I won't ask for a show of hands because I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I suspect there is at least one or two people, even here in Silicon Valley, who are not accredited investors. And if you are not offended every time someone says something bad about crowdfunding, I want to tell you to be offended. Because what they're really saying is you're not smart enough to read a disclosure statement. You're not wise enough to make good investment decisions. You need someone to hold your hand because you're not rich. If rich is the only definition of intelligence, we're living in the wrong world. Clearly, people who are accredited and unaccredited have the same intellectual capacity to make good investment decisions. It's an absurd standard to begin with that we are separating and creating opportunities for investment for people who are already rich and excluding people who are not rich from the same opportunities. It is philosophically objectionable at the highest possible level. So it's just crazy when the media or anyone talks down crowdfunding because what they're really saying is you're too stupid to make good investment decisions. And I want you to hear it that way when it's said so that you'll turn the tables, because none of us are too stupid to make wise investment decisions. And the evidence I would give, Kendall, you gave the great example of Massachusetts and Apple, which is similarly absurd. Many of you are too young to remember, but there's this little company called Microsoft. Some of you have heard of that company, but most of you don't remember its history. Back in the olden days, Microsoft went public with a market capitalization of about $400 million. Now that sounds like a lot of money. And it is. It's a lot of money. It made Steve Jobs, wrong guy, Bill Gates, right? Right? It made Bill Gates a rich man at the time. He ultimately became the richest man in the world, and to this day remains the richest man in the world. He's had a couple years off along the way, but for the last 20 years or so, he's been the richest man in the world. But all of us had the opportunity to participate, because that stock was a publicly traded stock. So most of us own Microsoft, whether we own it directly in a portfolio somewhere or in a fund that we own and may not even be aware of. Most of us have participated in the growth of Microsoft and earned dividends from that company. They earn returns. Now I want to compare and contrast that with Facebook. Facebook went public almost 2 years ago now, right? At a market cap of $100 billion. So it was, what is that? 3 or 4 orders of magnitude greater, right, than Microsoft. So very few people had an opportunity to participate in the growth of Facebook, even though all of us were on Facebook. We all appreciated it, and many of us could have made the wise decision to invest in that stock long ago. But we didn't have the opportunity because it was privately traded. Now, some of the accredited investors in this room were able to pick up shares on second market, but those of us who are not accredited had no opportunity to participate in that. That represents a fundamental flaw in our securities markets here in the United States. It means that people are being boxed out of investment opportunities because they're not considered smart enough. Again, I want you to be insulted. If you are not an accredited investor, I want you to feel insulted, because that's what it is. It's an insult from our own federal government that they think we cannot handle the truth. In fact, I trust you. You can handle the truth. You can handle these investments. And crowdfunding, this whole philosophical shift in the capital markets of this country, is a re-democratization of the capital structure so that we can all participate in having access to growing companies. So I think we all need to share in having a voice on that cause. Anyway, yes, let's go on to questions for these other guys.
So, sort of building on that theme, I'm a securities lawyer and I have clients looking to do crowdfunding, and many of them have said, we want to offer shares to the public, but Title III looks like it's going to be such an administrative nightmare that our first option is mainstream venture investing, then Title II. Is there a concern that there will be a winnowing down effect where the deals that can't get funded any other way are going to go to the people who can least afford to lose the money? And is that a function of the regulation, and maybe the regulation needs to treat accredited and non-accredited in a more equal platform?
Great question. Kendall, do you want to take a shot at that?
Oh, sure. I think that's a very, obviously, a very legitimate point. I hear the same thing in my practice, and not to keep harping on Regulation A+, A+ would actually be publicly traded stock. Part of what Regulation A+ would require is listing on a stock exchange, whether it's something Howard's putting together or one of the others. It has to be listed in order to be traded, so it is a publicly traded company. That takes that out of the realm. But you're right. The problem is this divergence that's out there, and if something's not done, it's going to be over-regulated into non-use. And so I think that's what most of the people that have written public comments to the SEC have tried to address is we need to ferret out some. I agree with Doug's comments earlier. A lot of what's in there is actually necessary. There's a lot of people that have made public comments that don't make a lot of sense, probably not people that have studied the law. But there's a lot of public comments that have gone towards making this a usable platform, a usable thing that securities lawyers and others out there can use to actually make this into the re-democratization that it needs to be. The way it's written right now, it's going to be very hard. Title III, I mean, my personal opinion is it's potentially maybe even unusable for a lot of clients. Just unfortunately it is. It's too expensive. I mean, startup businesses that used to come to me in 2000 to 2008, and they would say, Kendall, I need $100,000 to start a business, okay? And I would pick up the phone and call Bank of America, and the bank president would write him a line of credit without even asking a question. I probably caused the collapse of the economy, by the way. But I mean, those days are long gone. And so now that person is going to have to go through all of the expenses the SEC has put into place. It's not tremendous expenses, but can you spend $20,000 to raise $100,000? If you're trying to raise $100,000, you don't have $20,000. And so that's the problem. And it's got to be made affordable for it to work.
Great. Let's go on to another question. Yes, in the back. What's your name?
I'm Bob Mew. I happen to be in the securities industry. I've been for 40 years, and I'm glad I'm near the door so I can run out. I absolutely disagree with what you just said, and I'm probably the only one in the room. The accredited investor rule isn't to say that you're smart. It's because it's to measure the ability to sustain a loss. And there's a huge difference. I think our current security rules need to all be revamped and rewritten, but I absolutely disagree with your comment. The fact of the matter is, right now, the SEC says, particularly for those of us in the brokerage industry, you must know your customer. If I put customers who are not accredited into any number of these investments and they lose money, they're going to sue me. And it's because the PIABA, the plaintiff's bar, is excellent at bringing that about. I agree there needs to be change, but I totally disagree with your statement that the only reason to measure a qualified accredited investor is intelligence. It's ability to sustain a loss, which many people will if they pursue this.
No, you're exactly right with respect to the idea that the abilities to sustain loss is a key part of that. I believe, in contrast to your view, that unaccredited investors can make wise decisions about how much loss they can sustain. Someone who's not accredited doesn't have zero ability to lose investment dollars. They have a lower ability to lose investment dollars, and they can figure that out for themselves. They don't need the federal government to decide. They can't play in a whole arena just because they can't sustain as much loss as you. So no, I disagree with you. I remain disagreed with you, but you're certainly welcome to your opinion.
Last one, tell that to the plaintiff's bar, because even if you're correct, the plaintiff's bar says we're going after the party that recommended it because my client only makes $80,000 a year and it was an inappropriate investment.
Yep.
Period.
That's a legitimate problem, and I agree that is a problem.
Can I address something real quick? But see, that's why Title III has limitations on non-accredited investors investing. They say you can only invest up to a percentage of your income. They put that in there to protect the people who aren't smart enough to make a decision about how much they can invest. Now, and I don't want to hog this, but my law partner does nothing but securities arbitration. So I see PIABA lawyers coming through my office every day. I see nothing but securities arbitrations going on every day in my office. And I can tell you this, PIABA plaintiffs lawyers, they're not going to sue over a $2,000 loss because they can't make any money, all right? A $2,000 loss in a Title III thing, you go to one of the PIABA bar members and say, will you take my case on a contingency fee basis and advance all the costs to do this and litigate this for 3 years and then go to a mediation and go to an arbitration panel and spend $10,000 of your own dollars to recover $666.66, which is what their fee would be? They're not going to do it. Well,
But the
the
class wouldn't
class
be big
action
enough.
up to a class of $100,000, you have the same problem. That's my point.
Yeah.
These are limited investments. This isn't a $20 million fund, a $30 million fund. It's a maximum of $1 million. I'm not saying no one's going to do that, but it's possible. But the costs in a class action are incredibly expensive too.
People can go on E-Trade today and take their entire portfolio and bet it on a junk stock as well. I mean, people are making investment decisions on a daily basis. The only, there is the liquidity difference there, but people are, making investment decisions regardless of accreditation standards currently.
Yeah, Howard, you wanted to add something too.
Just a couple points. One is that the current financing in the United States, most of it is from non-accredited investors. The private placements allow 35 non-accredited investors. Most people are like myself. When they open up a business, they don't know anyone with $1 million in assets. And remember, it's $1 million in assets excluding your home. A lot of people sign their accreditation documents when they think with a calculation in their head that they're accredited, but they're not actually accredited. So most of the financing in the United States is already non-accredited investors, and it's not working so bad. The other point is that I sincerely believe that the amounts that are going to be put into crowdfunding, small investments, a lot of small investments, are going to be competing with disposable income, not competing with the nest egg that a person has. They have their own incentive to protect their nest egg, and they're not stupid enough to lose their nest egg, with some exceptions, of course. This is going to be competing whether they go out for a steak dinner twice a week or once a week, and they're going to take some of that money that is the spare money that they have to take a risk and use it instead of purchasing a Ruth Chris $200 meal. They're going to make a $200 investment in a small company, usually somebody that they know. But keep in mind that most of the investment in the United States is from the 35 non-accredited investors. If you study any startup company, most of their money has come from non-accredited friends that they have that are in their local area. Speaking of accredited investors, this is a very elite group out of the population of the United States, and only 3% of all accredited investors make any kind of investments in startups. So if you limit it to that group, your chance of either getting VC financing or getting financing from an accredited investor, if you're not in the Gulf Country Club, is about the same as your chance of getting hit by lightning twice.
Very good odds. More questions? Yes. And your name, Damon? Great. There is a company, and I'm blanking on the name. Oh no, it's AssureVest. AssureVest is offering insurance just for that, that you buy, and I think they're thinking that the price of that insurance would be about 10% of your investment. So a $2,000 investment, you'd pay $200 for insurance against fraud. And they would do some underwriting to determine that there isn't fraud likely, but that's certainly one way in which that is addressed. Yeah, the platforms could require that in theory. That would be one way that the platform could address it.
Well, the platforms are going to be insured also. I mean, believe me, if I was running, my initial intent in getting into this business was to run an equity crowdfunding platform until I saw that all the liability is on the equity crowdfunding platforms. I have no interest in ever doing that again, unless those rules change. However, I will make it very clear, everything's insurable. Everything can be underwritten. I actually got a survey last night from Scottsdale Insurance Company, which is part of Nationwide, that they're looking into writing insurance for funding portals and crowdfunding deals, and they're asking for my opinions on it. Yeah, it's going to happen. There'll be an insurance model for funding platforms to get covered.
Devin, I have
Sydney,
a question. I know you about social entrepreneurs and wrote several books about it, and advocated, and you have your own conference every year in Utah. What do you see that the social entrepreneurs now are getting to the crowdfunding, crowdfinancing? Is it for profit now? Are they changing the business models? I mean, what is going on that?
I think there are two, thanks, Sydney. I think there are two things that are going on in the social goods space. And one is that a very traditional world of fundraising that has involved, everything from galas to fun runs. All of that is moving in the direction of online, and most people in that space call it online fundraising. They don't call it crowdfunding, but more and more they're beginning to recognize the term crowdfunding as what they're doing, and more of them are using crowdfunding platforms like Fundly and Indiegogo. And then independent of that, there's a whole other group of people, and it's really a movement that started 30 years ago with Bill Drayton and has evolved now and grown into really kind of the most exciting space in entrepreneurship, especially at most universities. So young people today are being schooled enthusiastically in this idea of social entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship for the sake of making some sort of social change and a profit along the way. So those entrepreneurs now are coming into the marketplace, and I think what they're finding is that with a social mission attached to their entrepreneurship, they make really good crowdfunding prospects. And at least for early stage donations to help kick off that kind of enterprise, they're having some success. Now ultimately, I think that will mature, like all innovation, like all entrepreneurship, into equity-based crowdfunding, which then would, of course, lead into wanting to have your shares traded on Howard's Exchange. But we're seeing certainly that there are some impact investor-oriented crowdfunding sites. Mission Markets, Gate Global Impact, and Return on Change are three that I'm aware of, and they're all getting some scale and traction for equity investments in social change kinds of businesses. So it's exciting to see that developing. Thanks, Sydney.
Hi there, Fred Campbell. Question on, is Title III enable non-accredited investors to pool their funds to make investments as approved?
Kendall, why don't you address that?
And this is probably, I don't think it's directly addressed in Title III. And I may be wrong on that. I've been asked that same question before because of obviously the angel list type, and I think that that's where it's certainly going to go. I don't believe that they actually stay, and if someone out there is more familiar with it, I don't think it actually addresses it in the Title III language, but I think it's certainly where it's going to go, because I think having a lead investor who can direct a fund might make a lot of sense in that area.
Joy, did you want to add?
Oh, I believe, and Doug would know this, but there's no special purpose vehicles within Title III allowed.
Does it actually specifically say you can't?
I believe so.
I think
I've heard that several times. So.
All righty. I think we have time for two questions, or 2 minutes. 2 minutes is time for one question. Okay, who gets the lucky last question? Yes. And your name?
Scott Whaley with National Real Estate Investors. We're a nonprofit. Is there a role for the nonprofits, and I'm not sure who would be the best person to handle that, as far as setting up the portal, and as far as, because, obviously we have a different position, we're not trying to make profit on it. And so would there be an advantage to setting up the portal or getting it started? Because there's a huge interest, but again, people with a lot of money or a lot of assets are hesitant, obviously.
Sure. Don't know.
Joy, why don't you take a crack at that?
Sure. So, I think there's a lot of groups who have, large affinity bases out there that are looking at starting platforms just because there's, they have all the people, it's an additional service that they could provide. Some of them are going with like white label platforms. Others are partnering with platforms. I mean, I think it's a real value add for the community, and you've got the user base there, both a lot of times from the investor as well as the, the company standpoint.
Is there legal shielding or advantages?
I wouldn't think so.
I wanted to add one thing. Probably the most effective use that I've seen yet of crowdfunding has been done by nonprofits, and it fits in with what Richard said earlier about closing that gap. I was lucky enough to go to the Clinton Global Initiative fundraiser at the Hollywood Bowl last year. 17,000 people there. And they showed an emotional video of all the great things that the Clinton Global Initiative is doing. And then Bill Clinton, our former president, came out to speak. He's a very persuasive speaker. And then right there at that moment, as Richard pointed out, they put everybody into action. They said text 123 and then whatever the next digits would be your donation. And they got everybody to act right exactly at that moment. And they knew what they were doing because they're doing really good things, and a very persuasive speaker in a very special setting. And they knew that even if people were emotionally touched, as soon as they got in their car and started driving home and got to their kids, even if they were thinking about giving, they might forget about it and likely would forget about it and not do it. But they made everybody take out their phones right then, and you felt peer pressure that if you weren't taking your phone out, you were looking like odd amongst your peers. And I heard that they collected millions of dollars. This is a lesson for crowdfunding, but it also pointed out that nonprofits have already had the advantage and so have politicians. Our current president, over $100 million in under $200 donations to get elected. A lot of people believe that if it wasn't for so-called crowdfunding of the president, we wouldn't have this president. Somebody else would be president named Romney.
Alrighty.
Could you finish with your famous line that you do in your all interviews? I don't want to steal it from you.
I will finish with that. I think, Kendall, you wanted to say one thing before we wrap up.
Yeah, just everyone, on Saturday is the 2-year anniversary of the signing of the Jobs Act, which is obviously a very special moment for all of us. And I am launching on Blog Talk Radio a weekly crowdfunding radio program that's actually going to start this Saturday on the 2-year anniversary. It's called, you can go to the site, and it's not trying, speaking of nonprofits, doing a Blog Talk Radio show as a nonprofit organization, trust me. But my goal here is to bring in everyone, anyone in this room who's interested in being on the show to talk about your experiences. We have several of the people. Howard is supposed to be a guest. Woody Neese is going to be on. Karen Kerrigan. People that were there at the signing of the Jobs Act will be on live. We're going to take live phone calls, and then every week we're going to have people call in. If you have a crowdfunding campaign, a question, things like this, want to know how to do things, I'll be doing this 2 hours a week starting this Saturday, 1 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 o'clock Pacific Time. Just go to crowdfundingradiolive.com and you'll be able to listen to it, and then it'll be every Wednesday night live from here on out until I get tired of it.
Great.
8 o'clock every night.
How
So I just wanted to
about
tell everyone and
Howard's
invite everyone.
show? When are your shows going to start, Howard?
The CNBC show is pending the Title III legislation, and they're getting irritated with us. They started to show Shark Tank, which is an ABC show, on NBC because they're waiting so long and they didn't want to wait any longer.
And of course, we're grateful to have Devin at CrowdFund Beat and also Crowdcast.
Yeah, so we're having a lot of fun. All righty. Crowdfunding is going to change the world. Let's do some good.